Well, I'd like to welcome you to the first ever um, early career for IO Psychologist mentoring panel. It is hosted by DIAC, which is our Diversity, Inclusion, Accessibility Committee. We're a new committee with SIOP. Before we were an ad hoc, and this is our first year of being a legitimate committee. So we're really glad you're here. We really want to promote mentoring young career people who are IO psychologists, but also those who have finished their academic career and are out in the world trying to make a difference. So we have a wonderful panel for you today. So I'm Dr. Tiffany Jameson. I am a practitioner. I have a practice called Grit and Flow, and we work on neuroinclusion. So that's kind of the area I focus on. And I am right now heading the mentorship committee. I'd like to introduce my team and their roles here. So first I have Kirsty. Kirsty Lauder is a postdoctoral associate working at the Lab Inclusion for Everyone project with aims to support a Cornell lab in becoming more inclusive for students and staff who are neurodivergent and are disabled. She's the chair in training, whoop, whoop, for the SIOP-DIAC. So she's going to be our leader next year, which is awesome. Or 2 years, right? Yeah, one more year. That works. Her research has previously focused on accommodations for ADHDers. She is a neurodiversity advocate and identifies as neurodivergent herself. Kirsty's going to be womaning, checking out the chat. We're going to be answering questions at the end of the session, but we encourage you to put your questions in chat. Sorry, it's really early in California. Questions in chat. And then if you have assistive technology, we hope that you can take the time to put it into a way where you can enter it into the chat. So if there's something else you need that can allow you to be more accessible, we'll talk about that a little bit when Zoe comes up. So Zoe is also here, Troxel. Hopefully I'm saying your last name right. Zoe's a senior doctoral student pursuing her PhD in social organizational psychology at Teachers College, Columbia University. She holds a master's degree in applied social psychology from Royal Holloway University in London. Her research, teaching, and practitioner work focus on accessibility, disclosure, employee well-being, human resource management, organizational level assessment. And she'll be joining the job market soon. So we want to make sure you knew that. So that is your committee. We're here to help you in any way possible. I want to let you know why we have 3 topics we're going to be discussing today, and I'll introduce our panels in a moment. But the topics come from a survey we did of the DIAC community. So we did a survey and we analyzed it, and these 3 topics are what came up as the biggest need of areas people want to talk about. So that's where our topics come from. So now I'd like to move on to our wonderful panel, which I'm so grateful we have just the phenomenal people, and I appreciate you dedicating your time to this great committee and what we do. First, I have Adrienne Colella. Colella? Am I saying that right? Oh, you could immediately correct me.
Colella.
Colella. Yes, I am the name slaughter, so I own that. So I will ask.
No, Colella is fine, but it's Italian, not Spanish. So
There
Colella.
you go.
Yeah.
Well, say I'm Hispanic, so there you have it.
So you get Colella, yeah.
So Adrienne is with the James W. McFarland Distinguished Chair is in business and served as a professor of management at Tulane University's Freeman School of Business since July 2005. Since 2022, she's a winner of the Stringberg Research Award and the Tulane University Research Scholarship and Artistic Achievement Awards for her work on equity, diversity, and inclusion. Prior to joining the Freeman School, she was a faculty member at Texas A&M University, Mays Business School, and the Department of Management of Rutgers, I never say that right, University. She received her PhD in IO psychology from the Ohio State University and a BS degree from Miami University. She's a fellow for the SIOP. She's a American Psychological Association and part of the Association for Psychological Science. She's a past president of SIOP and a current board of trustees for SIOP. So we really appreciate all your dedication to our profession as IO psychologists. And next we have Dr. Nancy Doyle. She's the founder and chief science officer of Genius Within, CIC. It's an international B Corp and nonprofit. They provide coaching, assessment, training, HR consultancy, and scalable digital services to thousands of businesses each year. Genius Within won the Queen's Award for Business in 2022. Nancy has worked with disability inclusion since the late 1990s and is a chartered occupational and coaching psychologist, registered both in the British Psychology Association, or excuse me, Society, and the American Psychological Association. Definitely not working today. Nancy is also the co-founder of the Center for Neurodiversity at Work at the University of London. She's a Forbes columnist. She has a BBC documentary. She just does amazing work, and I'm plugging her new book that's coming out is Learning from Neurodivergent Leaders. So please, it's supposed to be released Friday, but you can get it now. So thank you, Nancy, for joining us. Now we have Dr. Tim Vogus, who is at the Browley Curry Junior Professor of Management and the Deputy Director of the Frist Center of Autism Innovation at Vanderbilt University. He received his PhD in Management and Organizations from the University of Michigan. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters in leading autism, healthcare, industrial relations, and management journals. He was named one of the 50 most influential business professors in 2013 and top 40 business school professors under 40 by poetsandquants.com in 2011. He received the Excellence in Teaching Award from the Healthcare Management Division from the Academy of Management in 2019. He's the Associate Editor of Healthcare Management Review and has previously served on the division as a division chair for the Healthcare Management Division of the Academy of Management. His research on the practices, processes, and interpersonal behaviors that help create and sustain workplace cultures that are inclusive of neurodiversity. He especially focuses on the double empathy problem and the technologies and workplace and practices that come before it. So I'm going to stop having to read because apparently it's not working for me today. So we're going to go ahead and jump in to our first topic. So our first topic is about navigating networking and partnerships. So this is kind of a broad topic. So the panel members have, full freedom to address this topic any way they'd like. So I'd like to pass this on first to Nancy to go ahead and jump in. And you're muted.
There we go. So yeah, I was thinking about this from the perspective of my own career. So I was I last had a real job in 2002, and I've been an independent practitioner or master of my own business since then. So I really consider my IO psych career to have started around 2002, 2003, which is when I got my master's degree in occupational and organizational psychology. And I got my chartership about a year later, because in that era you could work on the two at the same time. And so I was kind of out in the world practicing as an independent consultant when I was probably far too young and inexperienced to do so. And I would say the first section of my career, what was really important was to be useful, but to be boundaried. So, I didn't have the expertise that I had today, but I could work and I was organized and I knew how to contribute to a project. And so I worked with lots of different independent practitioners and just found ways to be useful to them. So I think that was, I spent about 10 years learning from other independent practitioners and working on joint projects. And I would say definitely you have to be useful, but you do always have to be boundaried. I had this kind, I really overexpended myself, and I would take on the world. And if someone offered me something that I could do, I would just say yes, and I would say yes to everything. And this is great for getting started, but it is absolutely terrible for sustainability. And at some point, you have to flip that switch and go, actually, now is the time where I have to start restricting what I do, thinking more strategically about the projects I take on and what's going to be useful to my career rather than what's going to make me a useful person that people call because they want someone to help them. Do you know? Finding that trigger point is really important. But I would actually say both parts are important. You do have to do that early graft work in the first few years of saying yes to most things and really giving yourself a breadth of experience and making sure that you have a reputation for being useful. And then you have the kudos to be able to start being more selective about what you choose. And I would say I probably started being selective about 5 years too late, and I should have done that much earlier. So don't do what I did. But that book that Tiff has just shown you, that is an entire book of don't do what I did. It's a book of all the things I got wrong. And I think the most important thing that I got wrong in terms of navigating networking and partnerships was not having a good enough awareness of my own worth and not realizing until much too late what I had to offer and how valuable it was. And in that period where I didn't understand my own worth, I gave away far too much IP. I took things on that I shouldn't have taken on that weren't helpful to me. And I've got this, the dark triad of leadership that we all study, right? So I've got this idea that the dark triad of leadership is very skewed towards the dominant paradigm of leadership. And that for female or otherwise minoritized by class, race, LGBTQ, neurodivergence, etc., for minoritized leaders, there's a different dark triad. And the dark triad is deference, rescuing, and martyrdom. And that is something I talk about in my book a lot because I used to think that was just me. And now, having built up a company with 50 employees and 200 associates and mentoring other leaders, broadly neurodivergent and disabled leaders through the process, I think actually these are quite common, and I think we have to be really understanding of our own worth, protective of our intellectual property, and we also have to start with the end in mind. So when you get into a relationship with someone you're networking with or a partnership, imagine what's going to happen when it goes wrong and how are you going to exit that relationship. Don't go in blindly thinking that everything will always be fine. Get contracts in place, get NDAs in place. It sounds awful, but you really have to be protective of what you're doing. Those are my kind of top tips. The dark triad, the alternative dark triad, and value yourself. Tiff, you're on mute, babe. I don't know if it looks like you're talking. I thought,
I
yeah.
am talking, and it was great. You all missed it. No, I was just saying, as somebody who's in her seventh year of doing this myself, it's important to know when to say no and to start doing that. So I think that was wonderful advice. Can I pass this on to, oops, and I went to the next topic. Can I pass this on to Adrienne?
Sure. Okay. So we're talking about networking and forming partnerships. And I have to say, networking and forming partnerships actually made my career what it is today. I didn't start off in the field of disability and looking at disability issues. It just came about. I was a new assistant professor. This is in 1989, out of graduate school. I was at Rutgers. I was in the business school, and I ran across and I was doing research on realistic job previews. My advisor was John Wanis. You guys probably are all too young to might know who this is, but you're all too young to know who that was a thing at the time. And I ran across this old economist in the labor studies program, Monroe Berkowitz, who was extremely well known in the disability field for doing disability research and had lots of grant money to study this. And we got in this conversation, and it was, I don't know what's going on. There's all these, government incentives to, for when people get injured on the job to get them to go back to work, and they don't go back to work. And I'm like, well, you're an economist. You're just looking at this like rationally, not considering, has anyone ever asked them what happens to them when they come back to work? What's it like having a disability in the workplace? Well, no, there had been very little research at the time on it. Some random social psychology studies. My husband even did a study like in the 70s on this, but no real good theoretical background. Then I met Diana Stone, and we got to talking about this. And Diana has a personal interest in the area, and she's a wonderful scholar and a wonderful early mentor for me. And her and I got together, and we came up with our Academy of Management, our review article, which kind of gave studying disability in the field of IO psychology and management a kick in the pants to get going. And from then, I'm happy to say it has, in a lot of different ways. So thank you, Nancy. And well, I'm coming to you later on. So that was one relationship that meant a lot to me. Then somehow I met Suzanne Brurier. I don't remember how Suzanne and I met. It's been over 20 years. We must have met at a conference or something. Over the years, her and I have done a lot of projects together. We just did another short paper on why we need DEI and the science behind it, which, given our current political situation, Mickey Hebel and Eden King and are putting together a journal special issue on this topic. But Suzanne changed my world. I mean, she was a great person to work with. She has so much experience in the field. She liked my, scholarly ability and, statistics and, psych background. And we just got along great. We became great personal friends. And we just really, she just helped me grow a lot. Tim was another person that came along because there wasn't much on neurodiversity at the time, except companies were doing it. And there were firms out there doing it. So this is something that was happening in the practitioner world, in the business world, but scholars weren't really saying much about it, not in our field. Okay, in disability studies and those kinds of journals. Yeah, but not in our field. All right. So then I said to Suzanne, Tim had the conference at Vanderbilt, invited Suzanne, and we went. And besides having a great time in Nashville, we said, hey, we should do a SIOP Frontier series book on this. So everybody, and this is a series of books that really is kind of the scholarly cutting edge, meant to spur on research in an area. And we're like, this is a perfect topic. And, I've pitched it to Kevin Murphy, who is editor, and Kevin has a neurodivergent son. His son is on the spectrum. Kevin loved the idea, loved the book. It gave us a lot of useful things. And then from that book, that's how I became very familiar with Nancy's work. And her and Tim both were gracious enough to write a chapter for that book. And these are relationships that I've had that have brought me where I am academically. On the other hand, there's other relationships that have been more personal. Okay, well, with Suzanne, we're really good friends, but also helped me in terms of becoming recognizable in the field and active within SIOP. And, Christy and Tiffany, you're doing a great job by doing this. I say, keep doing this, keep getting involved. Through my involvement with SIOP, which I started at the beginning, chairing various committees and the program committee and bigger committees, and then getting elected president. But meeting so many neat people, forming really strong relationships, and helping to get there is meeting a lot of people I wouldn't have met otherwise. Leetta Hugh, she's semi-retired, Marv Danette, Wally Borman had a consulting firm. I worked with them. Those relationships really helped me later on in navigating SIOP. along with my professors from graduate school.
It sounds like you've really spent a lot of time building really strong relationships both
Yeah.
ways. So it's medium. I'm going to move on to the next question, just because of the time sakes, but I'm just so impressed with what you've been able to do and, just pulling us all together. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So our next question is about, let me get back to this plane here.
Hey, Tiffany, before we move on, can I do my
Oh
networking
God,
bit?
I'm sorry, Tim. Oh my gosh. Yes, please, Tim. You guys gotta keep me on.
That's okay.
Be honest
It's okay.
here.
Yeah, I'll keep it focused.
No, you don't need
So,
to.
so one of the things when I think about networking, I don't like networking, and maybe many of you on this call don't like it either, because the way I think we are often told in our doctoral programs or the way we observe it at our conferences is to go to these big, overwhelming, noisy parties that are awful. I am well known for being a person that will, yeah, I'll be at the party, walk through one single loop, and then leave immediately and say to people, "Oh, I was there. Sorry, I missed you." It's just like, I am not neurodivergent, but I relate to some of the experience of the sensory kind of overwhelm, the anxiety overwhelm I get in those settings are unenjoyable. So I don't do much of that. So the ways I've thought pretty systematically about managing it because, as Adrienne was detailing about her own career, I think for all of us, and I think, it's a lot about relationships. So you have to figure out how to work and collaborate with people in constructive kind of ways. So the ways in which I've tried to approach it is to try to manage it in a way. And I think a lot of what I'm going to tell you next in this next little segment is consistent with some things that Ludmila Proslova's written about kind of neurodivergent, kind of inclusive networking practice. It's really excellent stuff, as is all of her stuff. And speaking of excellent stuff that I'm really excited about, Nancy, I'm really excited to read your book because it sounds awesome. So the ways I think about networking are kind of shrinking the setting. So if the big party is overwhelming, what can you do? Shrink it, make it one-on-one, make it small group, do it outside of these big kind of ballroom kind of settings. Find a setting that's a little bit more private, quiet, calm. You even make it virtual, right? Like the low cost of doing that now. Another way that I struggled is a lot of times at these parties, you have this kind of vague small talk you're supposed to have. Everybody's doing their careerist things and looking at your badge to see if you're at a high enough status school for them to talk to, if you're worthwhile to getting, advancing their interests, whatever they might be. They're probably scanning the rest of the room while talking to you, and it makes you feel, kind of crappy. So a lot of the meetings that I try to have are interest-focused conversations, around, maybe it's something that's exploratory. Hey, I really like your work. Can we talk? And I'd just love to hear what you're up to, right? Like that might over time lead to something, but you're not making any commitments and you're not asking anybody for any commitment. Could be advice seeking. Could be on a specific project, on a potential collaboration, on something about career. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a later segment. But I think these kind of interest-focused conversations, it takes down the anxiety of anybody you're asking to network with, because you aren't going to spring upon them. Oh, by the way, do you have a job for me? How about $10,000? Can you give that to me in small unmarked bills? I think that's what people fear when being asked to network. So you're putting that person you're interacting with at ease. They're meeting and they probably want to help or want to have a good interaction with you, but also could be nervous, like, what's the other shoe that's going to be dropped? Is somebody else working an angle? Because we've all had those kind of conversations where somebody's really just trying to make use of us in some kind of way. So also, Nancy said brilliantly, start with the end in mind, right? Like, what are you trying to get out of this in the first place? So don't just go in, hey, I'm going to network, because that's going to be nebulous and it's going to fail. I loved her idea of, some of my other research is on healthcare organizations, healthcare quality and safety, and things like that, mindfulness. And what Nancy described is do the pre-mortem, think through the way in which this relationship is going to fall apart, and then kind of work back so you have it structured in a better kind of way. I think that's a really good idea. When I say, what are you trying to get out of network, or starting with the end in mind, thinking about the different types of networks that exist. So there are kind of operational or task networks, so who are people who are going to be able to help you in your work, however you define your work, whether it's getting or completing projects, whether it's publishing papers, whatever it might be. There are support networks. So who might be the people that help you manage the ups and downs of the career, the friendships and social support, like Adrienne was describing about Suzanne, who is great at being a friend to people and helping them manage the ups and downs for certain, and exceedingly generous. And then kind of strategic, right? Like, so who can help you identify opportunities or good directions in the field, or maybe ways you should go, or who other people you get to know and maybe can help broker connections and do that kind of thing. And I think we might do too much on the strategic, which might inhibit us from doing those things that might be closer in on the operational and help us, like Nancy was describing, kind of, the reputation for being useful. That's really task kind of network stuff. And you don't want to only do that, like she rightly described, but you do want to do some of that. So it's not all just about, hey, I just need to get to know this fancy person and they'll get me a great job and high status in the field. That's not how it's going to work. And then I think we can also think about, how do you break down like the initial asks of people? Because sometimes that's a big big barrier. Like, how do I even get a meeting with somebody? And I think it might be easier than you think if you think about it systematically. So when you reach out to somebody, dropping them an email or something like that, tell them why you're reaching out, what you would like to know, right? Like, what unique contribution they'll make to the meeting. And I would really focus on learning, not something they're going to give you, right? Like some kind of interaction or something like that. I think people are willing, especially if you're a junior person reaching out to a senior person, as I did throughout my career and still do. People are very happy to give advice and have a quick meeting where the learning is the focus. That's a lot of the reason why all of us are in this field. Showing people you've done your homework, right? Like you actually know something about them, so you can make the case for them. Here's why I think you're a unique person to contribute in this kind of way. So you're not just asking for something that a quick Google search could provide. And also, I think Nancy was emphasizing this too, knowing your worth and thinking about what you can give them and what you're working on and why it might be interesting to them. So it's not just, so it's a mutual relationship, and those tend to be the stronger ones, right? If you might have an uncommon commonality or a shared connection with somebody, that might be a way to do it, to take advantage of some of that power of similarity. And then just making the initial ask, specific and bounded, right? Like, hey, can I have coffee with you for 30 minutes? Or, hey, can you do a 30-minute Zoom? I would like to talk about X, Y, so that's something. And then you can do more once you have that kind of foundation. So those were the thoughts I had about kind of some of the nuts and bolts of the how-tos.
Yeah, that was very helpful. And I think I did that with you, Tim, is coming in, hey, I read your articles, and yeah, so it definitely is nice to do that. A real quick question, just like a very, very short answer from everybody. Networking sites, social media, what do you think are the best ones to be active on? Nancy? You're muted.
Ooh.
Okay,
It depends whether you're doing academic or practitioner. I mean, LinkedIn, undoubtedly. ResearchGate is good for keeping track of what people are doing academically. Yeah, I would say those two, really.
Okay. Adrienne?
I don't have anything to add to that. I don't, honestly, I don't use social media very much to either professionally or personally. So,
Hey, Tim?
I had some good luck early. I agree with everything Nancy just said. And I used to use Twitter a little bit for this, but it is now a dumpster fire. So I don't know that I would recommend that any longer. But there used to be
I totally agree. Twitter used to be such a good place for interacting with other academics and other practitioners. It is such a shame. I'm starting with Blue Sky, Laura. I am trying, but I am nearly 50 years old now, and there's only so much new technology one can absorb.
Totally. Right there with you, Nancy.
You're a baby. I don't even use it. I never had it.
I think it's important, though, to think, because we have so many multiple generations in here, and from an academic standpoint, like, where do you go? Like, what do you do? So I think I see more academics going towards LinkedIn myself, where before I don't think they would have touched it. So I just wanted to get your thoughts. So the second topic, again, which I jumped ahead, thanks, Tim, for pulling me back in. My neurodivergence is at its finest today. Practitioner scholar careers and opportunities. So let's go ahead and start with Adrienne with some thoughts on that.
So I'm a pure academic. I mean, I've worked in consulting firms a long, 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 long time ago, but I'm a pure academic. But if you're an IO psychologist, you have to be in touch with the practitioner world. If you're an academic, that's what we do. We're scientist practitioners. Some of us are more heavily weighted on one side, more heavily weighted on the other side. And what I suggest in whatever area you are is get involved in activities where you meet people from the other camp, and so what's what's going on in both areas. So that's my advice on that. And
Great advice. Thank you for that, especially from a academia standpoint. I think it's very helpful. Tim, what are your thoughts?
I will be similarly brief because we have among our trio the GOAT on this, the greatest of all time, with Nancy, there is nobody better at bridging this divide, being a spectacular scholar and the most influential of practitioner. And Tiffany, you too, I hope you will weigh in as well, because you have lots of great insight on this. So I will be brief. So I, like Adrienne, my whole academic career has been, kind of a pure type academic, I would say, except for in recent years with some of the stuff that we do at the Frist Center. Now that's very academic. It's kind of combining engineering and management and psychology and medicine and bringing a whole bunch of folks together. But what it does also actively try to do is, bridge a little bit of that divide and have some more relevance for practice than, maybe the average academics output typically would. So I would say that's one thing to look for in your universities. What are those entities that are maybe giving you an opportunity to get in front of practitioners and talk with practitioners? And I would obviously, with my healthcare work, do some of that as well, like with medical centers and things like that. And there might be some, overlap with this domain as well, although the medicalization of nursing not the best, so maybe not the first choice for where to go. In terms of like practitioner scholar careers and opportunities, I also want to say, yeah, obviously right now, since the last few weeks, probably feels like a really precarious and scary time for anyone who's kind of thinking about the world of practice in this domain. So I think that merits being said. I don't have an answer for that, but there seems to be change, but I think there doesn't mean there is an option. There are an option to some folks that I've worked with or know personally, so I've seen some kind of IO psych type PhDs doing user experience in tech companies, things like that. There has been some retreat from some of that, like with ethical AI and things like that, because apparently now we just want unethical AI that's going to control our lives. But, IO and OB folks obviously have a lot to say about those kind of things. One of my friends from graduate school, Catherine Dekas, has had a incredibly successful career at Google doing HR, people ops, and analytics. A former student of mine named Richard Rosenow has kind of like used LinkedIn. So to answer your previous question, Tiffany, about what kind of ways in which can you, as an academic, maybe get more influence and get more visibility and maybe become more of an independent consultant or even find jobs. He used LinkedIn, and he did an independent study with me when he was an MBA student to like develop a series of LinkedIn, detailed, research grounded kind of LinkedIn posts to kind of establish him as somebody with some expertise in something, like Nancy said in her opening remarks, somebody with something useful to offer, right? Like, I'm a thoughtful person. I know this domain, it's an emerging domain. So he did that starting back, now about 10 years ago, but it's garnered him a lot of influence and a lot of opportunities. So he's kind of embraced that kind of IO kind of mission in that kind of way. I think, to the extent that companies there are still a number of neurodiversity hiring initiatives where there's opportunities for IO folks to be a very constructive participants. I think there are companies that do, Nancy will say much about what she does, but I also think there are other places that support employment, like Integrate Advisors or Specially Sterna or Optimize, or these kind of places that, they may not have a wealth of job opportunities, but those types of organizations, I think, can use people with IO chops. And then in government, there still are entities that do this right now. We'll see if that changes rapidly, but like there's the Office of Disability and Employment Policy, like Scott Robertson is somebody there who does incredible work. So I think places like that might be options as well. So
that was very helpful, Tim. Thank you. Nancy?
I've never seen them as two different things. Genuinely, I don't see it as a thing I do as a practitioner and a thing as I do as a scholar. I see it as the work that needs doing. So I'm a much more mission-driven careerist, if that makes sense. My mission has always been it's always been contextualized within disability, but it's always been around um, how do we stop wasting opportunity? How do we stop wasting people's potential? Why are people on the sidelines not being used for what they have to offer? Why are we ignoring people's gifts? How do we have so many people marginalized and out of work? And how can we optimize performance? How can we make it so that people can work at their best more of the time and find work fulfilling? And I think it's quite personal. I'm a neurodivergent person. I absolutely hated school. I missed 2 full years of high school. I just didn't go. I used to do my work at home and go and see my teachers once a week and hand it in. And work was my salvation. I loved work. I started working when I was 18 years old as a support worker in a group home for autistic and intellectually disabled adults. And I loved work. Having hated school, I loved work. And I was just like, how do I get other people to know that this is possible, And I had a lot of friends who were just utterly workless, who were completely just not managing at all. I now realize almost all of them were neurodivergent. And my first jobs as an IO psych were working with long-term unemployed people. So it was just always about how do I make work more accessible, more fair, more fulfilling. And I'm glad I did so much practitioner work first, because I think having had such a terrible time in education, I couldn't have come into academia in a traditional route, because the process of academia was unintelligible to me. So it wasn't until I had enough content that I could work my way around the process, if that made sense. So I definitely think it had to be that way for me. And bear in mind, I did my chartership, which is a doctoral level qualification, when I was in my 20s, but I didn't get my PhD until I was 42. So the point at which I did my PhD was the point at which I got fed up with there being no research. I don't know if any of you know the work of Professor Rob Brinner. He works in workplace well-being, and he's part of the Centre for Evidence-Based Management. He was one of my lecturers when I did my master's degree, which I was working full-time when I did, because of course I was. But he was one of my lecturers, and he used to just bang on about evidence-based practice all the time, and how annoying it was that practitioners didn't re-engage in academia, didn't keep up to date with the latest research, didn't evaluate their own work. So I really took this on board, and I always evaluated my own work. My first publications were just practice evaluations of coaching that we were delivering. They were things that I was doing routinely. So do you see what I mean? I've never seen the two things as separate. And I used to really enjoy going to meet Rob Brinner at conferences and going, Rob, what's your evidence that practitioners don't evaluate their own work? That's basically how my PhD started. Because I was doing all this evaluation, and Almud said to me, "You're doing all this work, why aren't you doing a PhD?" And I was like, "Oh, how hard can it be?" Well, I know now. But yeah, I just don't see that. I just see it as the work that I have to do, which is to, work at this system from multiple perspectives until it is easier for a wider range of people to participate happily in the workplace, and for us not to squander the usefulness of the full range of human diversity and creativity.
I think that's amazing. It's so interesting. We all have our different paths. So for me, a research practitioner was more of the means to an end, in the sense of knowing there was a mission of something I wanted to accomplish, which is address the unemployment rate and figuring out how to get there. So I do come from more of a consultancy background, MBA and more of the business, but knowing that there wasn't enough information for me to do my job right to make that change. That's where I saw we had to go in. And the more I got into research in my PhD program, what I recognize the most is there's so much we know through research, but it's not being translated into practice. So we see people going into businesses as, consultants, but they're 3 years behind. And if they would read the research and be more involved in the research, they would understand that we can jump ahead a couple years if you would look and see the great work academia has done. So that was something that I
And vice
find.
versa, though. I
Hmm?
see a lot of research coming out that is just so divorced from practice, it's meaningless.
I
It,
agree with Nancy. I the same thing. I mean, a lot of
Mm.
I get lots of papers to review, and a lot of them, their response is, "Who cares?" I mean, what does this have to
Yes,
do with anything?
yes.
Why aren't
So
we
what?
seeing? Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But I mean, when it comes down to it, I look at, all these studies coming out telling us, autistic people have a hard time with interviews. And then I see practitioners going, oh, well, where do we start on this? And this is, once again, this has been a journey for 7 years of seeing the difference in it.
Mm.
But I do see like the work Tim and I have been working on with business schools. I don't think there's things that they thought about, and I think it applies to many different things, many different careers, many different paths.
Yeah.
So to bring that practice experience into the research is important too, to say we need to research these issues. We don't know. But I also think there's a lot that isn't translated. So that's kind of where I see the two come together. I mean, I agree with Nancy, they are the same thing, but I also know as an entrepreneur, how hard it is to run a business, to be a consultant, and to do research.
Mhm.
It's extremely
Yeah.
inaccessible for me to get to academia research without being associated with an institution. I have to like, hey, Nancy, send me a paper. Hey, Jim, send me a paper. So I think there are some challenges with being a practitioner, not being associated with academia, but I think you need to do both to be good. I think one thing we need to bring up though too from a standpoint from IO psychologist is, our role really is different. We have so many different hats we can of what we can be as IO psychologist. You have people who are working more in HR and assessments. We have all these different areas. So it's very diverse what we can do too, so from a practice standpoint. And some of that doesn't require looking at the research. So it really does as much as it is. So just we have a very diverse amount of people in this career. So that's
I
my
have to
two
say,
cents.
at the moment, I'm more annoyed at the research. I was more annoyed at practice for a very long time, but I'm currently more annoyed at the research. I see people jumping on this bandwagon and trying to apply what they know from other fields into neurodiversity without a lot of thought, using outdated language, using outdated processes. I mean, I've recently seen a paper published in Human Resource Management that talks about work, oh God, work avoidance behaviors for neurodivergent people. It talks about how people neurodivergent people avoid participating in work environments and avoid coming into the office. And not once in the whole paper does it mention sensory sensitivity. Now, how that paper has been published, it makes me angry, actually. I'm like, this is like sensory sensitivity is 101 of neurodiversity. And so yeah, I think there's yeah, I'm on a mission with that, really.
Yeah.
I'm a bit cross.
Yeah. No, I think we've seen a lot of that, like,
Yeah.
using neurodiversity as a diagnosis and just the terminology.
It's getting very messy. And
And
it
I
needs
agree
the
with that. I
practitioners to
definitely
go in
agree
there
with
and
that.
go, hey, researchers, by the way, don't you know that as practitioners, sensory sensitivity is 101? You can't talk about work avoidance behaviors unless you're also talking about open plan offices, noise cancelling headphones, overhead strip lighting, strong smells, busy commutes, long commute. You have to be talking about those things as well, because what we see in practice is that's the stuff that keeps people out of the work environment. It's not
Mhm.
because they don't want to engage. It's not because they're antisocial. It's because
Yeah.
it's overwhelming and they can't bloody concentrate. So that's why we need that dovetail between practice and research. And I think researchers that are not connected to practice don't see that. And practitioners, just as much as practitioners that are not connected to research, struggle with, going down rabbit holes of guruism and snake oil.
Also, our journals though don't like to publish practical papers. It's got a like advanced theory. You can't. We need work that just looks at, you know, does this work? Does this selection
Yeah.
technique work? Does it increase numbers of people, getting in?
Yes.
Is it valid? Is it, those
Mhm.
kinds of things? And that's not in fashion anymore in IO journals. Like
Do you know,
you go
it's
back and look at old personnel psych journals. I mean, it would be like specific tests of, like Nancy was talking before about, you know, she would do research on whether this technique worked or not. And yes, I mean that's what's
yeah.
needed. And
Totally agree. It's intervention evaluation.
yeah,
That's, we are missing intervention evaluation,
yeah,
quasi-experimental intervention evaluation. We're not going to get the pure RCTs. We've got to be compromised in terms of applied research, but we need ecologically valid
yeah.
intervention evaluations more than anything else in this field. I'm kind of bored with theoretical papers. I think they need to shush until they've done some more work.
Okay, we went a little off topic, but I think it's still really an interesting one for us all to look
Yeah,
at.
Okay,
sorry.
set us up.
No, no,
We can
I
move
think
on.
this one is
We can
about
go on a
mentorship
lot
across
about
the
this,
career
I'm sure.
cycle, but I think we're talking really about that. Because I think another thing is we're going to go off topic, but I think we need to look at the editorials, the people, the editors, the gatekeepers. I mean, I've had a recent experience where they were trying to dictate the language we use because they thought it would sell more journals, or things like that. So I think there's a whole plethora, if that's the right word. I have dyspraxia, so it doesn't always work. About, how we need to change the system. So I think we need people like you three who are so respected in the industry. I think you're going to make the changes in that. And I hope you do. And I know we will back you up any way we can, but we're looking to you to help make those changes in the bigger picture of academia and how we go about this. So, and the last thing I want to enter is when we want to do these interventions, I can't get clients. Do we have to get businesses that allow us to do these interventions and do the
Yeah.
measurement? And they're
Yes.
not allowing us to do
Yes.
that. So,
Yes.
we need to have that pre-post test. And we just can't get the engagement. So there's a lot we need to do too, is to pull in partners with organizations to do that, and not just these big neurodiversity hiring programs. We need to do the mom and pop shops. We need to do the smaller organizations, the people that are just living life and seeing if these things work. So last thing I want to talk about, and first I want to ask Kirsty, do we have a lot of questions?
I haven't had any questions yet.
Okay, so then we're going to use the last 10 minutes to talk about, mentorship across the career cycle. So, we have, early career people in their graduate or, PhD programs going into the career. I know we have some people here, Zoe, who's getting ready to, enter the workforce. What do we do with our mentorships? Where do we ask? I guess, where are those boundaries? I'd like to start with Tim for this one. And we only have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to
Yep.
ask if you keep your
I'll
responses
be
to
focused.
3 minutes.
I'll be focused. So with mentorship, I think the starting point of not just going in and asking somebody, hey, will you be my mentor, is a good piece of advice to start with. Letting relationships breathe, develop, and grow a little bit. Because most of the time, like we talked about with networking and relationship building, generally, you're looking for something specific out of that kind of networking, or I'm sorry, out of that mentoring relationship. Are you entering a new research domain? So Adrienne might not even remember this, but I talked to her a very long time ago, and she was one of the very first people. She was the first person I reached out to say, hey, I'm interested in this disability stuff. I want to see, here's the kind of work I typically do. I want to port it into this domain because it's personally familially relevant to me. And so that was some great mentorship she gave me. It took me a long time to be able to effectively put it into practice, but everything she gave me through that one conversation was, as you would expect, a game changer. It might be advice on a project, or somebody who can periodically give you advice on projects, or read papers, or give feedback, or help you prioritize. This seems like a better, more viable path to take than another. Maybe it's job market strategies, feedback on cover letters or tenure packets, or helping identify letter writers and things like that. Those are all mentoring type activities, but somebody doesn't necessarily need to be the formal mentor to provide it. I think availing yourself of formal mechanisms at some of our academic societies are good with this. So one that was really helpful for me was the Healthcare Management Division of the Academy of Management, where they and I participate. They have a matching program that kind of senior, meaning old folks with white in their beards like me, matches with junior folks. So you have and there's kind of a set time to have an initial meeting. So you're both in agreement about wanting to do this. And there's some commitment over the course of the next year, you'll connect X number of times. And so I think making, participating in those kind of mechanisms can be really good because it's also helping you identify people who are willing to invest in you. And those people probably know other people who are willing to invest and support. So I think that's helpful. I think this community, the DIAC community, is a great one. So communities with shared interests. Liz Fulmer also has a neurodiversity micro community that's doing great stuff, and Liz is awesome. And I think, some of the things that, again, Nancy said at the very beginning about volunteering, making yourself useful in a focused way, like don't overcommit because you can classically get exploited through these kind of things. But if there's like one thing, but just to get in a community of people so you're visible and known a little bit, that's a great basis for getting multifaceted membership. Another thing, high status is not the same as the good or the right mentor. Senior folks can be helpful in specific kind of ways, navigating processes that they might have a good handle on. They're probably more than willing to meet and share advice on this stuff. But I would also say sometimes senior folks have very rigid opinions about what is the right way to navigate a career. So I would always triangulate your advice so you don't get totally bummed out by somebody who's very old school. And it's like, what? You don't have 27 AMJs? You're worthless, right? Like, you might want to avoid that. I had a spectacular advisor whom I still collaborate with 25 years later, and consider one of my closest friends, most influential people in my life. But my career really took a pivot. I had a really slow start publishing wise. And I got great advice from somebody who's just a few years senior to me, who I think Adrienne knows, also Ranga Ramanujam. And he said to look for peers or near peers who share goals, interests, and motivations. And that led to a new network, kind of fresh network, some great collaborators, and opened up a whole range of opportunities. And I'm still reaping the benefits of that advice to this day. So that's my.
So we're moving on to Nancy, and I got to give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, I've got a very brief thing to say about this, which is not to underestimate how fulfilling and useful it is to mentor people. So I currently have 5 PhD students and 5 psychologists that are going through the professional training in the UK, and I love that time. I find it motivating. I find it encouraging. What you've just said, Tiffany, about the 3 of us kind of, creating some ethics and some kind of, quality control in our field. I think without knowing that there's another generation of people coming forward who care, who are committed, who are mission driven, who have ethics and boundaries, without knowing that those people are there, the work I would doing is exhausting and overwhelming. So, when you're looking for mentoring opportunities, do not underestimate how much the mentors will get out of that as well as you. It's fun finding people who geek out about the same stuff you geek out about. It's fun.
Yeah, I agree there. All right, Adrienne, if you can give me your thoughts, it'd be wonderful. Or us.
Both Nancy and Tim have done a great job. All I will say is that mentoring continues on throughout your career. I'm at the point where I'm getting ready to retire soon, and I find I'm searching out retirement mentors and asking anyone who is retired to tell me how you do it. And and this question actually made me think about this, and that's what I'm doing. I'm looking for retirement mentors, but it's something that goes on throughout your career, and I totally agree with Tim. It's got to be something. Good mentorship programs happen organically. Good mentorship relations happen organically, and it is putting yourself. And you're not going to get one at a cocktail party at SIOP or Academy meetings. And it's just putting yourself into situations where you're going to meet like-minded people. Okay, and also people that aren't like-minded or working in different areas and expand your network. So
that's amazing. You know,
Can I just very quickly pick up on the question that Indra Yani has just put in the chat, because I think it's super relevant to all of us. You know, how does she approach DEI in the job market? And I just want to say, from the disability perspective, I'm moving away from talking about accommodations and adjustments, and I'm talking more and more about optimizing performance, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. And I feel like the narrative that we have makes it feel like it's a favor and it's a scarcity of resource. And, you know, well, you need permission, and you need a special say so, and you need to be part of a special program to get a special treatment and to get special favors. But if we took all of that language away, and I just said to a manager, hey, you've got 5 members of your team and 3 of them would do 50% more work if you let them work from home on Friday and wear noise cancelling headphones, that manager is going to have literally zero problem with that. But if we use the language of, well, you know, I've got sensory overwhelm and I'm sensitive to this and I'm sensitive to that, so what I need is these things, these things, these things. What we need to be doing in research and practice is putting our money where our mouth is, actually. We've been saying for years that diversity equals creativity, that diversity equals enhanced performance, that adjustments and accommodations are good for people and they enable people to do their work better. Great, let's just start talking about that. Because this work is about optimizing performance at the individual, team, and organizational level. And if we can connect those dots, it will stop being a political football and it'll just start being logic.
And that was a mic drop
management. Yeah.
All of you. So we have one question and we have 2 minutes that we haven't answered from the chat. So Kirsty, I'm going to hand it over to you.
I think the answer might be similar to optimizing performance, but someone said that they were recently outed as neurodivergent at work due to the shift to hybrid work. So their managers' reactions were unhelpful and they were unfairly scrutinized. How can they strategically share their neurodivergent identity in the future in a way that fosters understanding and support rather than risking negative career consequences?
I'll leave that whoever wants to jump in.
I think about this from 2 perspectives. Number one, do you want to be working for an employer that views you as views this as negative? Do you know, like I think it tells you as much about the employer as it does about you. But don't forget, you're a participant. You have agency in the employee relationship. I know it feels early in your career like you're dependent on someone giving you a chance, and it's your job to prove yourself to other people. But actually, it's also the employer's job to prove themselves to you as a safe place where you can thrive. So if you're not getting anywhere with that, go and find a new job with people who actually value you. I mean, outed is in the UK, that's illegal, and you'd have a disability discrimination claim. So, you know, that's all I have to say about that. Outrageous.
Now, as of today, it's still illegal in the US. So
yes, yeah.
As of today.
Yeah.
Okay, it's very illegal in the US, actually. It's even more so. You're not even allowed to talk about disability in some states, are you? You're not even allowed to ask about it.
No, I'm working in one of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I wish we could keep talking for hours because this is such a great panel, and this is a lot of important topics with this. So maybe we'll do a little bit more towards the end of the year with something. But I want to thank everybody for being a part of this. It was a great discussion. I recorded it. I'm going to put it out on YouTube. And I'll let everybody know where the link is so we can have more people take advantage of all this wonderful wisdom you've shared. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for attending. So have a wonderful rest of your week.
And thank you for putting this together.
Yeah, wonderful. It was the committee. So thank you to Kirsty and Zoe for being
lovely to meet you, Adrienne and Tim.
Nice to meet you too.
Hi, darling.
What you look like.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.